Thank you very much. I would like to thank Dr. Josephson and for the introduction, Dr. Butterfield, the faculty, and the students who all played a part in getting me here this afternoon to be with you as we celebrate Women's History Month. I was here this morning, and I'm so happy that I was here this morning for Senator Gill. She was absolutely fantastic, and it seems that you here in New Jersey have a fellow sister, and I am going to make a special effort to get to know her a whole lot better because her story parallels mine in so many ways. Maybe she will end up running for president too one day. I think it's appropriate to think about the status of women here at home and around the world because, as we know, we just celebrated International Women's Day. Of course, as a black woman, I'm committed to the improvement of the status of both blacks and women. The theme of this year's Women's History Month Symposium is Women Redefining the Politics of Power. I believe that we should also investigate the extent to which the powers that be, that is power with a capital P, has redefined women's politics to the detriment of women. So I have entitled my speech, Is Power Redefining the Politics of Women? I believe we should also ask the same question with respect to African Americans. Here's why. It was my father who literally pulled me into the political arena and taught me its power. You see, I saw in my life a direct benefit from the kind of political action that presses a specific demand. We were not involved just to be active. We were involved with a purpose to make a difference. Of course, there were men and women who were involved because they sought adulation from others, and politics was a way to get that. But it was important for me and those around me to be able to distinguish the sincere candidates of change from the sycophants. It was important that candidates and incumbents alike, voters and constituents, be the ones pressing the system at all times with nothing in mind but our interests, therefore making a difference for all of us. We felt that anyone holding an official position not pressing for our interests was not working on behalf of the community. We were trying to redefine the politics of power. My story starts with my father, who was arrested in his army uniform, still on the train coming home from Europe, and when that train stopped, he went into the station to taste the white water. He drank from the white water fountain, still in his U.S. Army uniform, and promptly got arrested. That was my father's welcome back to the United States after serving his country to make the world safe for democracy. Shortly after that, my father became one of Atlanta's first black police officers. He couldn't arrest whites even when they were in the midst of committing a crime. The black officers would have to call a white officer to make the arrest. There were certain parts of town the black officers couldn't even venture into, and they couldn't even change into and out of their uniforms inside the Atlanta Police Headquarters. They would have to trek down the street and around the corner to the black YMCA. So my father would protest all of this, sometimes, most of the times, alone, because the other blacks were too afraid to join him. For 20 years, while he was a policeman, my father watched as others received promotions based on whatever the indignity was that he protested. From my father's experience, I learned service without expectation of reward. And then one day, my father decided that it was insufficient to protest public policy. One ought to make public policy. So he ran for office. 2 times he ran, 2 times he lost. Because both times he ran were before the Voting Rights Act was law. But then in August of 1965, after Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law, things changed for black people across the South. Things changed for our country. From the film American Blackout, you get a bit of this history and the story of what happened to me twice and how the black vote was systematically disfranchised, not only in my elections by the use of crossover voting, but also in our last two presidential elections by various Republican schemes that remained uncontested by the Democrats. The Voting Rights Act mandated that election laws and certain practices prevalent in the South change or be discontinued. With the elimination of those practices, backed by the strong arm of the federal government and the courts, the landscape changed in Georgia, and my father ran for office and won. That was an interest in this case, black people redefining the politics of power with a capital P. With his position in the legislature, my father could use his power of his position to inject his values into the system and make the system respond. He immediately then filed a lawsuit against the state of Georgia for its discriminatory hiring practices, won that lawsuit, and the state of Georgia was under a court decree on hiring until my father's ouster from the Georgia legislature by the same forces and methods that targeted and ousted me in 2002. I wanted you to have this background so you can understand why I believe that the political process, even as imperfect as it is today, can do powerful things to help people and change circumstances. Why I believe that we can use the tool of our vote to obtain from the political system what we need to be free, to be treated equally, to find justice, to live in peace. Frederick Douglass told us that power concedes nothing without a demand. It is clear that the political system can deliver, but we need to be clear on what is the demand. According to United for a Fair Economy, racial disparities in 2004 were in some cases worse than at the time of the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That on home ownership, without public policy intervention, it would take 1,664 years to close the racial gap in home ownership in our country. In 2005, United for a Fair Economy explored the disparate impact of Bush's Ownership Society economic program that saw black and Latino lives shattered as unemployment, income, home ownership, business ownership, and stock ownership plummeted. In 2006, United for a Fair Economy focused on the devastating and embarrassing effect of government inaction before, during, and after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. They focused on car ownership and the relationship between vehicle ownership and race. In the case of New Orleans, car ownership literally meant the difference between losing or saving one's life. In 2007, United for a Fair Economy explored black voters' attachment to the Democratic Party. And in a piece entitled, "Voting Blue but Staying in the Red," they explored goals that the Democratic Party should have put at the top of its agenda for its first 100 hours in the majority, while noting that the Democrats didn't even mention Katrina in their agenda. United for a Fair Economy concluded that blacks and Latinos voted in November 2006 in the blue, but due to a failure of public policy to pay attention to their needs, they continue to live in the red. In United for a Fair Economy's 2008 report, they explored the subprime mortgage crisis and note that the largest loss of wealth in U.S. history is being experienced by the black and Latino communities, with an estimated $92 billion being lost by blacks and an estimated $98 billion being lost by Latinos. And while families who are losing their life savings and their only major investment are asked to sacrifice, policymakers are asking them to tighten their belts. But the bank CEOs are walking away with record remuneration. Sadly, United for a Fair Economy isn't the only research organization to find glaring and intolerable disparities by race in our society, with no appropriate public policies enacted to address them. Hull House did a study that found that it would take 200 years to close the gap in the quality of life experienced by black Chicagoans and white Chicagoans. Sadly, there has been no public policy initiative taken up by the mayor or the governor of Illinois to begin closing that gap. Several years ago, the New York Times published a finding that nearly 1/2 of the men between the ages of 16 and 64 in New York City were unemployed. There was no initiative by the mayor or the governor of New York to begin addressing that pain. Every year, the National Urban League publishes a study, The State of Black America, in which the ills and disparities that persist in our country are cataloged. Every year, the story is basically the same, and only public policy can address these glaring disparities. Pressing the system with a public policy demand constitutes an interest, redefining the politics of power. That's power with a capital P. Now, that same power likes to use politics to advance its own, not other people's interests. Now, what I've learned is that the rich folks in this country who constitute that power with the capital P know what government can do, and they know how to press a demand in their interest. That's why they've got lobbyists pumping hundreds of millions of dollars in the political system so the corporations and the individuals they represent can get what they want. That's what the Gina 6 district attorney meant when he went to the high school and announced to the students that with the stroke of a pen, he could ruin their lives. He could use the power of his position, the power of politics, to impose his values on the community at large. It is to wield and influence the power of position and the power over the public purse, the power over public policy, that we engage the political system, not merely to hold positions. Dr. King said that the Negro in Mississippi must be able to vote, but the Negro in New York had to have something for which to vote. The power to make public policy in our own interest is that something for which we vote. The statistics reflecting life for blacks in the United States cited in repeated studies reflect, in my opinion, a dismal failure to translate our votes into an agenda that eliminates disparities and presses our interests. As United for a Fair Economy concluded, blacks vote in the blue but stay in the red. That, I maintain, is politically dysfunctional. Please understand that a $3 trillion federal budget and 51 multi-billion-dollar state budgets and thousands of multi-million-dollar county, school board, and city budgets holds the possibility of doing a tremendous amount of good. However, we are also seeing that a tremendous amount of bad can be done when that kind of money and that kind of power are put in the hands of those who are not well-intentioned or to those who are easily swayed off course by a proximity to power and wealth. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. I was not raised in a family where doing nothing was an option. So I participated in protests with my father to get the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Acts passed. I faced an armed Alabama Klan with my father, and I eventually ran for office, not as a part of my vision, but as a part of my father's vision. I was content to merely support candidates who were about the right thing. But the 60s and 70s, despite the challenges, were heady times for the movement, because my father's generation identified a problem. They fashioned a solution. They implemented that solution, and they benefited from their sacrifices, and then relied on succeeding generations to continue pushing the movement forward. And move forward our country did. The women's movement, the gay liberation movement, the American Indian movement, Puerto Rican independence, Chicano pride, and a powerful anti-war movement formed a synergism that propelled success on many different fronts, but also that set the stage for the setbacks that were to come from powers with a capital P reaction. While the American patchwork of humanity was being stitched together for real change in our country, the government didn't sit still. Its response was COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, a program whose mission it was, in the words of the FBI, to misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize black leadership in this country. I would posit to you that we, the keepers of the flame in my generation, failed to fashion a response to the concerted and largely successful COINTELPRO attacks on authentic leadership that surfaced as a result of our struggles. The official government-led attack on communities' authentic leadership is chronicled in Ward Churchill's book, The COINTELPRO Papers. There we see that in 1918, J. Edgar Hoover was concerned that Marcus Garvey excited the Negroes. The story of the government's interest in this authentic community leadership is available on the internet and should be understood to extend to today's cultural icons, hip-hop artists, community activists, and even pro-peace and environmental leaders. But in 1965, a document stamped by the CIA described what I call regime change on black America. It said somewhere at the top, there must be a Negro who is clean, who can step into the vacuum and chaos once Dr. King is either exposed or assassinated. This memo described exactly what I saw taking place in the Georgia legislature while I was there in the legislature. And the issue was who was going to go to Congress from Georgia's new Black Opportunity District. The Speaker of the Georgia House had his candidate, and the governor had his candidate. They were both black. But they got together to decide who the next black congressperson was going to be before the people in the new district even had the first chance to cast a vote. That's when I decided to run, because I saw how the Democratic leadership of my state intended to trick black people in Georgia's new but poor and rural black belt congressional district. Voters would invest their dreams and precious votes in a candidate who, unbeknownst to them, had already been pre-selected to protect the status quo, not them. This was power's response to the agitation from the legislature to get more blacks from Georgia into the U.S. Congress. I witnessed this, pulled the plug on it, and that's how I became a member of Congress. I had the temerity to think the people should have a representative too, and the people agreed. So an immediate challenge was to understand the scope of the problem associated with true representation. I had to learn the truth before I could fashion a public policy intervention that the numbers cry out for. Now, would my experiences lead me to believe that the need for civil rights is over? The answer is an emphatic no. But I would quickly posit that power wants you to believe that the need for civil rights is over. Power doesn't want you to think about pressing a demand for a group of people. Power only wants you to press a demand for your single individual black self. Power wants the freedom to go about satisfying its interests and wants you to redefine what your interests are. So now I want to turn very briefly to women. The United Nations informs us that women have not achieved equality with men in any country, that most of the world's poor are women, roughly 50% of women experience some form of domestic violence, and the use of rape as a weapon of war is becoming more evident. It is the struggle of women for equal treatment in the political life of our country that has motivated women to become candidates for office. Did you know that even before women had the right to vote, women ran for president of this country? Between 1964 and 2004, there have been 50 women on at least one state ballot in November for president of the United States. But not until 1972 and the run of the unbought and unbossed Shirley Chisholm did women candidates do well. Chisholm got over 400,000 votes at that time, a record, and sent 151 delegates to the Democratic Convention. The only woman to appear on the ballot in all 50 states plus D.C. was Dr. Lenora Fulani in 1988. In 1987, Congresswoman Pat Schroeder formed an exploratory committee but declined to run after not being able to raise enough money. It was at this press conference that she cried, and then the media derision began for women politicians. However, by 2006, in an LA Times Bloomberg poll, only 4% of registered voters said that they would not vote for a woman presidential candidate. While this is certainly progress, it is public policy progress that ought to motivate our political activism and provide a measure of our effectiveness. So, for example, women are present and achieving influence in politics and in the labor force. But even today, with a woman Speaker of the House and a woman running for president, women still earn less for the same work than men. So even something worse has begun to happen that I've noticed recently. At first, for women candidates, the press pays real close attention to the clothes that you wear. The choice of color becomes newsworthy. Then there's the issue of wearing dress or pants. Then there's the question of how much cleavage is enough. Well, I went to Catholic schools, so I cover up everything. And then I get emails from the public who are men, and they say, well, I'm wearing too much clothes. I need to take off what I'm wearing and wear something closer and tighter fitting. Can you believe? Anyway, if you'll remember, there was a photograph of one of our candidates with the caption, "Is America ready to watch a woman age?" I remember having a conversation with a former black woman U.S. Senator who lamented that the situation was even worse for black women because we're either Mammy, Sapphire, or Jezebel. And because of preconceived ideas held largely by white men about black women, and those images are played out on television every day, you'll almost never read adjectives like bold, sassy, intelligent, used to describe black political women, because those aren't the characterizations of black women in popular and historical culture. Keeping women inside the confines of a predetermined box could become a politically useful tool. The authors of Rebuilding America's Defenses, the Project for a New American Century, wrote that genotypically specific bioweapons could become a politically useful tool. And given the facts of MKUltra, of course you should know that here at the Robeson Center, the Tuskegee Experiment, and COINTELPRO, I have my senses finely honed to detect politically useful tools in use by people who don't want freedom, peace, equality, or justice for the rest of us. Professor June Scorza Terpstra wrote an article entitled "Hollow Women of the Hegemon," found at carolynbaker.net. Professor Terpstra's theme is that more and more of what we are seeing in politics today are women who represent the hegemon, rather than women who follow the traditional role of political women, which used to be to challenge the hegemon, or as I've used it earlier, that power with a capital P. According to Terpstra, Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice represent examples of this. And remember, it's far easier to get positive press when you're of service to the hegemon than when you're challenging it. Remember what Nia Gill said today. Dr. Terpstra reaches back to the writings of Frantz Fanon to remind us that the real tragedy is the extent to which powerful women now do the bidding of the global masters. It is this distinction that we must remember and constantly ask ourselves when we see candidates. The hegemon has responded to our successes, and as Terpstra informs us, is now about the business of using women to carry out tasks that serve its interests. Terpstra forces us to recognize that it's no longer the way it used to be, that voters could have confidence that women were in politics not to advance their own oppression. You could somewhat be sure that a woman elected to office was there to advance the collective interests of women in the country. Terpstra concludes that we, who are standing with the oppressed and for liberation, need new rules and new strategies and tactics to deal with the dangerous realities of a new gender and colorblind imperialism. So now we know clean Negroes, as described in the CIA document, and hollow women are politically useful tools of the hegemon. They are the example, not of women and blacks defining power, but of power with a capital P, redefining the politics of blacks and women. Hence, the name of my remarks this afternoon. So if Terpstra is correct, and we are entering a new gender and colorblind imperialism, what are we to do about it? I think the solution lies in us never veering from our goals, to keep our eyes on the prize. And the prize for us is public policy, a result. We vote to have power over public policy, power over the use of the public purse. We vote for an agenda and platform that moves our interests forward. Politics is the authoritative allocation of values in a society, and we want our resources directed to our values. So, for example, I want to subsidize education so students aren't $100,000 in debt when they graduate. I want a single-payer healthcare system in this country so we can stop spending so much and getting so little. I don't want a picture of a woman running for office and asking the question, are we ready to watch a woman age? I want a real discussion of how we're going to protect Social Security. I do believe it's possible to have this discussion, but only if we demand it. So I'm working with a nationwide group of displaced Hurricane Katrina survivors and their supporters from the Black nationalist, labor, and environmental communities who are prepared to wage a different kind of action in what is now clearly a different kind of struggle. While the nature of the struggle has changed, our objectives have not. We must never forget that Dr. King was murdered just as he was about to launch the Poor People's Campaign to demand equal economic justice, as well as peace and political justice. The notion being put forward by some in the corporate press that today somehow marks the end of the need for civil rights is, as George Carlin noted, the part of the American dream you believe only when you're asleep. The hegemon is counting on you to fall asleep. And my mother tells me that this world isn't going to change unless women change it. But the change agents are not the women of the hegemon. So stay alert. The people of our country need you.